ready to fire?
We're ready.
Okay. I really appreciate all but we're going to get started really quick. I am so excited that Arnett and Muldrow, this team is amazing. They have worked very diligently since Wednesday afternoon. They worked through the night, and Sheila, thank you very much for hosting them at the Red Mill, and the wonderful food, and
yes,
So super amazing people. Leanne Tingay is here, and she's from the downtown program in the state of Vermont. And again, I really appreciate her for choosing Wilmington as one of the 8 now communities that are being helped by the Arnett and Muldrow group. So, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Hi, everybody. For those who don't know me, my name is Leanne Tingay. I am with the Vermont Downtown Program, which is part of, this is going to get really government, part of the Division for Community Planning and Revitalization, which is housed in the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. Did you get that? There will be a test afterwards. At any rate, as you all know, I said this before, I've said this in other groups, 2 years ago, y'all had a little storm, didn't you? And even before that, I know things were, because of the recession and everything else, there was a lot of issues going on here in Wilmington. And when we had an opportunity for the Vermont Downtown Program to participate in a grant, I wanted to work with downtowns that had been heavily affected by, with specific damage and so forth in their downtown, because that's, as we know, it's the economic heart for a community, it's the engine. So when we were in the process of picking the team, we were very fortunate to come across the proposal from Arnett and Muldrow, because it combined a great combination of fresh eyes from various spots all over the country that have had experience with economic recovery after disasters, and also local Vermonters, so that we can have that great local Vermont perspective. So with that, I'm going to introduce it's been a long week. Trip Muldrow of Arnett and Muldrow, who is our team leader of what we're calling the Vermont Downtown Action Team. Thank you all again for coming.
Thank you all so much for being here. We know that sort of at this stage of the game in the recovery process, it gets a little tiresome to go to yet another meeting and hear another presentation, and we're keenly aware of that. So over the next 3 hours as we present, I walked in the room, I told the team we have 170 slides. This thing has to be over in an hour. So, and I told these guys to start doing this to me and slitting their throats if I went too fast. For the sake of, I'm going to go very quickly and introduce our team. South Coast Consulting, we have Stephanie Francis and Stacy Payer. They're from the Gulf Coast, dealt a lot with BP oil spill, Hurricane Katrina, and all the 11 communities along the Gulf Coast and throughout. Tom McGilloway is here from the Han Reichel Associates. Someone appreciated his southern accent while he's been here, but he's from Baltimore, Maryland, so it's on the line. Certainly we have Leanne, and we also want to thank Richard Amore. He's with the planning office that's in Leanne's complicated division arrangement that she discussed. My business partner and baby brother, Ben Muldrow, is also here from Arnett Muldrow. We're thrilled also to have Les Gangus and Heather Fontaine from Arnold & Gangus Architects out of St. Albans. And then Randy Wilson with Community Design Solutions, who's the Main Street architect for Mississippi and South Carolina. And then not present with us, but will be with you on future visits. We have Engineering Ventures based out of Burlington, Vermont, who'll be working with us on submissions as well. Having introduced the team, I'm going to jump right in. We really are organizing our discussion today around 5 key themes. The first one we're calling Cultivating the Market, Opportunities for Filling Vacant Spaces. And you have some very interesting market dynamics going on. The next one is Enhancing the Experience, Improving the Public Realm. Tom's going to talk about that. We know you've had a lot of folks looking at your public realm. One of the things that struck us as we drove in is just how amazingly beautiful the flowers are and the scenery here is in the community. The third theme is Preparing the Assets, and that really deals with dealing with building improvements and some practical approaches. Laz and Randy are going to spend some time on that. There's some real simple things that can be done. There's some more complex things that ought to be addressed. And a lot of these do relate back to the market piece. Then Ben's going to take over and talk a little bit about marketing. This community as part of a very dynamic region. And then I'll come back and wrap up a little bit with organization and funding techniques. And bearing in mind that we have a couple of visits, there will also be follow-up visits. So since we arrived at 2:30 on Wednesday, and today is Friday at noon, there are pieces that we just have not had time to address. So trust that if you see gaps in the presentation, that's because we just couldn't get there quite yet. And there are some things that we decided to hold back because we already had 170 slides. So cultivating the market. First of all, for the merchants who participated in the survey, thank you. You had the survey done in September of this year. We had 9 participants, which is just wonderful for a community this size. You collected 687 customer visits to this community during basically a 1-week period, right, Gretchen? 1 week. Customers came from 406 unique American zip codes and 30 different states and 3 foreign countries. That is truly remarkable to come through this community in a 1-week period, the kind of visitor traffic that you came through. Where are they from? Some of the things that struck us is that I've done over 200 of these market studies in states all over. I've done them in Springfield and in Brattleboro and in Burlington and in Waterbury and in Rutland. You have the second lowest amount of local traffic that I've ever experienced in a community that I've worked in. Only 12% of the customers recorded a 05363 zip code. And so even in some of the most robust tourism communities, I still have local traffic that comprises 20 to 30% of from the immediate zip code, 20 to 30% of the customers coming through. We can view that as a glass half full or a glass half empty. What I want to say is there is an opportunity before this community to be looking at stores that appeal both to the local and to the visitor in the core area of the village. We know folks are going to Family Dollar, we know folks are going to Shaw's, but we also know folks are driving to Brattleboro because when we did the market study in Brattleboro, you were showing up. So when we look at some of the surrounding communities, I'm not going to get into each of the slivers, but we have Jacksonville and West Dover and so forth, Whitingham. All of them sort of account for about 2 to 3% apiece. When we get you and your neighbors clustered together, you still stand at less than a quarter of your traffic comes from the southern Vermont area. And so again, that really does present an opportunity, I would say, I don't say challenge, an opportunity to look at businesses that serve the local as well as the visitor. So in fact, when we put these together, the locals, and we have New York factored in, New York does 0.5% less traffic than all the southern regional Vermont. So go hug a New Yorker. They're the ones that are coming here and comprise a significant piece of who represents your market. 11% from Massachusetts, 18% from Connecticut. Very interesting to see New York, well, very interesting Connecticut eclipse Massachusetts, and then 22% from other places across the country. Let me speak a moment about the other places across the country. When we looked at those zip codes, they were a who's who of the best zip codes in the United States of America. Beverly Hills, California, Colorado Springs, Colorado, Palm Beach County, Florida, Loudoun County, Virginia, the richest county in the United States of America, Bethesda, Maryland, Montgomery County, Maryland, some of the affluent suburbs of Philadelphia. The people who are coming here, those zip codes are emblematic of a consumer of considerable means, a consumer of considerable sophistication who are coming into this community, and that presents an interesting dynamic for you all because those kind of zip codes do not show up normally as visitor zip codes. When we looked at the counties in New York, Westchester County, when we looked at the counties in Connecticut, some of the most affluent counties in Connecticut, you did have some people of lesser means in Massachusetts that were wandering up here. I don't know how you let them in. But in the end of the day, we're really talking about a consumer here who is a sophisticated consumer. Part of what we want to do, sort of zooming back out, is, okay, so we know the locals aren't doing quite what we would normally see in a community as far as shopping here. So what we wanted to do is track your primary zip code, your primary trade area, and we define that by zip code. It really is not worthwhile to look at Wilmington independent of West Dover because the cross-pollination over that 5 to 6 mile difference is significant. We really need to combine those two together. And so as I go through this chart in great detail, I'm not going to, I'm kidding. We have broken this up into multiple categories and looking at your demand and your cluster analysis for this area to see where your leakage and where your gain is. When I talk about leakage, I'm talking about you spend dollars that stores here don't sell. You leak those dollars out, you spend them elsewhere. I know for a fact that many of you, the clothes that you are wearing today, not all of you, but the clothes that you are wearing today probably did not come from a store here. Now, if they did, congratulations, pat yourself on the back. We know there's apparel stores here that do a good job, but we know that your entire wardrobe is not furnished here unless you are a particularly dogged, determined, I see you must be, determined shopper. So that's leakage. We also have gain market, things where you sell more than consumers here can spend. And some of those categories, believe it or not, when we put the two communities together, West Dover and Wilmington, full service dining is definitely one where you sell more than consumers here can spend. The restaurants here would not be able to succeed if it were not for the visitors that come in. You eat in restaurants here because of the good spending dollars that others come in. If you were a non-tourist community, you would be traveling elsewhere for your dining needs because the consumers are really helping to sustain that piece. Having said that, that's full service dining. When we look at casual dining, the kind where you don't sit down, where you're served something quick, a stand or a food cart or something like that, you actually leak those sales. Now, I have to put a big old asterisk on that. What's included in that also is McDonald's. So, you know, I can't get overly excited about that category. So, at the end of the day, some of the key opportunities, I really think you need to build on your clustering. You have a strength of clustering. The home furnishings piece is critically important for you all, both with regard to furniture and decorative items. It took a real hit during the recession. And we know a lot of businesses here probably suffered because in 2008, people stopped doing a lot of that buying for the home. We expect that the long-term trend is that home furnishing is going to resume, particularly because of the housing situation you have here. 1 in every 4 houses is a locally owned, locally lived-in house. 3 out of every 4 houses is a second or rental home. That is among the highest, of course, that we've seen. We've certainly worked in similar markets. But one of the neat things about that is those consumers are also looking to deck those things out, and they always love an additional thing to go on the fireplace or the coffee table. Dining is another cluster that we feel like you can build on. It may sound somewhat counterintuitive to you, but dining does beget more dining. I think all you have to do is look at Northampton, Massachusetts to understand that that community certainly cannot sustain the amount of restaurants it has in town, but it's become a super regional dining destination. The final piece is outdoors and outdoor equipment. You have a cluster there where you're selling more, but the neat piece about this is, as I sort of did my drive through the community, explored it a little further, a lot of those are very much catering to the winter customer. So how do we begin to looking at the niches to fill that cater to the year-round customer, particular to, you know, the biking and hiking and summertime? We know some are, but when you have a cluster like that, it can continue to build on itself and you can be known as a destination for that. We look at opportunities to cross-pollinate with locals and visitors. Specialty food is a really interesting one. Specialty food is one where visitors will go in and locals will go in. You have a supermarket here. The supermarket, you know, succeeds, but also looking at, okay, where can I get even fresher meat? Or where can I get, you know, things that I like to have and more affluent people maybe like to have in that second home market. Some more limited service dining, even things like stationers and office supplies, where you see this crossover where the visitor's coming in to get something nice, but the local can also get some of the things that are convenient for them. We're going to do a lot more examination on the role of the second home in the visitor market. Suffice it to say, when 3/4 of your units are units that are not full-time occupied, it presents a very unique set of circumstances for you, because those people are coming, and it's got to be a partnership that you work with, both with the folks that control that real estate, whether they're independent property owners, or whether it's resorts that have groupings of real estate in order to extend that season and so forth. So some of the first steps, again, we'll be back in October to talk more about how to use the visitor and second home market data to refine your recruitment strategy. We really think you ought to consider some pop-up retailers. It might be that you talk with Pal over in Brattleboro and say, Pal, what if you were to open up a pop-up Sam's that's in the storefront here? What's that? You asked him already? Well, maybe not Pal, someone else. But consider that sort of temporary retailer that's coming in that can begin to put their toe in the water during some of the peak season and fill some of your business or fill some of your vacant spaces while you're waiting on a more full-time tenant to come in. And then continue to do what Gretchen and her team at Wilmington Works are already doing on building that detailed inventory of space. Some of the next step, the SevEd study, is really looking at things like co-working space, entrepreneurs, recruiting them to the area. We've heard discussion of that as far as co-working space here in Wilmington. Being as close as you are to Hartford and to Albany and to be able to get to the airport, we see this entire region as having a tremendous opportunity to capitalize on the lone wolf consultant who wants to live the Vermont environment, have an affordable place to live, but has access to the world. And then also, we rarely recommend this, but I think some consumer intercept surveys would be worthwhile for Wilmington Works to talk about, because when we're dealing with consumers that are coming from zip codes that we see coming here, they're going to have definite opinions about things. And just being able to hone in on what those opinions are, and my recommendation is work with a college, university, community college to conduct those surveys for you, so that you have a neutral body sort of feeding back some of their impressions. And then finally, some ongoing things, some funding for economic development, looking at funding downtown economic development, and then performance measures to track investment. And I'll circle back to that when I reach the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom.
Thanks. Thank you, Tripp. I'm going to be talking a little bit about improving, enhancing the experience of the visitor and the local resident in the downtown, the public realm enhancements, and then Randy will follow with talking more about the private realm. One of the things that we've been incredibly impressed with is the accomplishments that have already been done within the community. A lot of times when you live in a community day to day, you tend to focus on what hasn't been done and not really see what all has been done. There's the master plan, the Conway School Plan that was done, and while maybe everyone's not in agreement with everything in that plan, it's a good framework and a good tool for the community. the downtown designation that you received and the benefits that come with that, the parking lot work that was done, and I'll talk a little more about that, the pedestrian bridge, the work plans from the different committees. We met with the design committee and we're incredibly impressed. Wendy kept apologizing that they only had this very detailed binder that they put together and they since July. And it's probably more information and more organized than design committees that we've been working with for 10 years. So congratulations. And then, you know, in looking at a rough number, over $4 million or close to $4 million in both public and private investments since Irene. And then one of the last things is you've been able to maintain this, what we call a comfortable character. And we mean that in a very positive sense, that everything, the streetscape, the environment here is not so polished that it seems fake and phony. It's a very comfortable community that we think that you feel comfortable in, and we think you could really build on that character and maintain that. And just, I'm not going to go into the great details here, but the map showing, where's the pointer in this? Is there a pointer in this? I don't, okay. The parking lot that was here, I was really impressed by the story of that, where several people in the community got private property owners to provide easements at $1 a year that the town would pay for easements to create a public parking resource back there. We understand there's 1,000 hours of volunteer effort to make that happen. Planting the lights back there, the benches, cleaning out the undergrowth, the boardwalk path that goes to that parking. That is an amazing effort. Getting private property owners to agree to shared easements for the greater good of the community, it's very difficult to achieve in a community, and that's really something to be proud of what you did. And then we have 6 different the black buildings are vacant buildings, but 6 of those have some ongoing investment right now. That's part of that $4 million number. And then there were a number of buildings that were already completed. This is the boardwalk walkway going back to the parking. Volunteer effort, really well done. And we understand that the building, the facades, the volunteers painted some of those front and side facades as well, recognizing that people are going to see those as they went back to the parking. Again, a great project. The trail will be going in shortly along the backside of the parking lot. Trees and gardens have already been planting there, and foundations for lights have gone in there. The donation of the bridge over the stream, that's an incredible asset for the community, and you're really fortunate to have that. And then obviously the ongoing renovation of several businesses in the community. And as Tripp said, we were all just blown away by the flower program you have. That really makes a tremendous impact. And what's really interesting is not only the part that the beautification committee in the town provides, but you see that spillover on a lot of private businesses. And it really, the net aggregate effect is quite tremendous. This is kind of an unusual situation for us because you have already developed a lot of plans and ideas, and we're really coming in here not giving you new ideas, rather we're helping to confirm and helping to guide the efforts that are already underway. You've been looking at the streetscape, sidewalk paving, some traffic calming measure, lighting, trash receptacle, trees, and other elements. But I want to stress that one of the most important elements of a good streetscape is the buildings and that activity on the street. Some of the economic development initiatives that Tripp mentioned, getting more customers on the street, getting active storefronts is probably the most important thing you could have on your streetscape. In terms of sidewalk paving, we know you've been looking at a number of treatments, concrete further out from the core, and then considering the stamped concrete, color concrete on the inner core, and then providing missing sidewalk links, and then missing sidewalk links, which are very important, especially along West Main Street. One of the things, the section of stamped concrete that was put in, one of the things we'd recommend if you are going to go with the stamped concrete for the sidewalks in the core is to use a lighter gray color because one of the things that we notice is really the same color as the asphalt, and it doesn't really visually stand out from the street, and it looks like more asphalt. So I'd recommend going with a lighter color. And this is an example. This is in Burkittsville, Maryland, kind of a village scale character, and this is stamped concrete in their intersection. It's a lighter color, and I think it would enhance better.
Why would that matter?
What's that?
Why would that matter?
Well, it just looks like the road's wide, roadway. It distinguishes the pedestrian from the vehicular area. And as you can see here, with the lighter colored concrete walkways, it's very visually distinct from the roadway.
Yeah, just another comment to take that a little further, since Vermont, we're talking about Vermont branding, is also known for its marble. Maybe we can find something that kind of replicates marble on that.
The color, yeah, the color, yeah. And that's particularly important in areas like this where you're trying to distinguish the sidewalk area from the driveways and curb cuts. So that color contrast is very important for motorists and pedestrians. And this is an example in Milford, Pennsylvania, where that's done, and maybe the concrete walk extends over and some of the stamped paving distinguishes it with some banding treatments. One of the things that we would recommend, just in one area in front of the church here, would recommend that this be a no parking area, because for accessible, if there's a car parked here, pedestrians can't really get around there without walking into the traffic, and they'd have to go up some steps, so that's a consideration. Randy showed some visualizations here for crosswalks. This is the existing, okay. Anyway, we have a before and after in there somewhere. And then this is the existing intersection treatment. And this is showing crosswalks with the concrete inserts, the lighter color. It could be plain concrete or the stamped pattern. And then it's hard to show with this projector, but then this is showing a stamped concrete pattern in the center of the intersection. And that's maybe where you could do some darker concrete pattern. Oh, here we are. And then this is with the crosswalk. We're recommending several crosswalk connections. One at the bridge, at the new bridge going across West Main Street, and then using that same pattern throughout. Excuse me, I have been getting over a cold the past couple of days, so. The other thing with the sidewalks, we would, while this lighter colored stamped pattern we think could work, there is a little concern with the snow removal. Sometimes that makes it a little different with the ridges, and we really as a team do not feel there's anything wrong with plain concrete on the walkways, and maybe put some of your money and investment in some very special, some of those little outdoor gathering areas and things like that, putting the investment there and then maybe more flowers. But there's, the concrete for this scale of village and the comfortable feel could be appropriate. And that's something just to consider. Traffic calming, we talked about additional crosswalks, bump outs at the main intersection, and we recommend stop for pedestrians and crosswalk signs. And then tree planting also helps with traffic calming. One thing for the bump outs at the main intersection, we were noticing some of the truck turning radiuses, and it's very difficult. This is a project we worked on in Monroe, Wisconsin, and actually the bump out is just a stamped concrete pattern, but it's flush with the paving, so that trucks can still drive over it if they need to, but it still visually narrows the intersection, and that's something that you might consider at the intersection, is just keeping that flush, so that you don't have to worry about those conflicts with the truck movement. Lighting, we're in complete agreement with your plans for lighting using the existing poles. The fixture you selected is very appropriate. The downlight, it kind of supports that very comfortable, casual feel in the neighborhood, in the community, and then using the existing poles to mount that light onto. We think you're in the right direction there. But more importantly, we'd like to encourage you to continue work with private property owners to just light their storefronts, light their porch, turn on their door lights. That ambient lighting is very important. Even if the building's vacant, that lighting, it signals that someone's home, that the community's alive and vibrant. So there's a couple images that are already great examples in the community of how that ambient lighting is very effective in the downtown. Trash receptacles, we picked a fixture. The one on the left is one that you've been looking at, we think makes sense. We understand you want to do recycling as well. I'm not sure a recycling fixture comes with the one you selected, so an option to consider that's very similar is the Victor Stanley that has recycling and the regular trash receptacle, just in case the one you selected does not have it. Street trees, very important. We know the Conway School addressed that quite a bit. It's very difficult to get street trees on your streetscapes because of the narrow sidewalks and setbacks. So, and then also to maintain that comfortable scale of the community would really maintain a random approach at trees. Just get a tree wherever you can. Utilize and emphasize tall canopy trees wherever possible. Utilize evergreen trees for some winter interest. And then locate them to frame gateways and views. You know, obviously, you know, the sugar maple is just this wonderful symbolic symbol of Vermont. They're not great right up against the street because of the salt damage, but if there's any property owners that you can encourage to put sugar maples further in their lawn, that makes a great impact. And just you see the effect of just a couple trees along the street, both the deciduous and the evergreen, a couple trees make a big impact in the downtown. So we have, and then it was just really great that you saved these couple spruce trees in the parking lot, that little bit of shade, it adds to that, the scale of that parking lot. One of the things we'd recommend is to avoid using smaller ornamental trees. They tend to hide facades and architecture, and you know, this wonderful library building is kind of hidden by those low trees, and just a big canopy tree out in the yard would make a big impact. This is what a lot of business communities do. This is Americus, Georgia. Businesses say we want a small tree because we don't want to hide our business, but a small tree, in fact, hides your signs and your storefront. So this is a big don't do this. And then a couple examples of where trees might work. For example, on the red end, off to the left where there's the little median, there used to be a tree there, I think, in the postcard from days when it just helps with the scale. And then we showed possibly squeezing some in between some parking spaces. We know the Conway School showed a whole big planting area that got rid of the parking. We don't want to do that, but there might be the possibility to squeeze one in between a couple parking spaces, and that would help with the sun and just the scale of that lot. But if nothing else, that one down by the parking lot. And then coming in from the south at the municipal lot, where the paving goes right up to the street, potentially getting a tree in there. And then if we look further back, this is such a great gateway with the curve of the street and the church, but you have a big view of the parking lot, and there might be a way to introduce some trees into that image. And we actually have we put in the wrong version of this. There's one where the tree's not 4 feet tall, but we have that for the corrected version. Other elements, streetscape. The other thing important to consider for streetscape are just the outdoor displays, continuing the flower program, and then incorporating materials characteristic of the community. There's really a richness of materials throughout the community, the black wrought iron, the great steps, the boardwalk, the stonework throughout, and then build on those materials to inform any improvements that you have. So we have the next series of drawings are just, we have a series of phased action plans for streetscape. I'm not going to go through these details. This is more for the design committee in the town to use to guide their work. But a couple things early on that can make a big impact is just, you know, keeping the existing sidewalks weeded and cleaned. You don't have a litter problem. The sidewalks are spotless, but getting rid of the weeds is an immediate action. We have a series of plans with immediate actions related to street lighting over the main core area. We have trash cans placed throughout, strategic locations for trees, kiosk signs, directional signs, gateway signs for the downtown. I'm not going to belabor that because it's hard to read for this scale. Some of the next steps that we'll go through are actually implementing streetscape. Primarily the main core would be the preference, if you could, the first 2 blocks of North and South Main, and then the core of East and West Main. If, for example, you don't have the funding for that, West Main would be the most important, including the intersection of North and South Main. And we'll be getting into some of the funding a little bit later on. Some great proposals in the Conway School. The Brissett Park, we agree with. We think that's a great recommendation on some of your immediate term plans. Longer term are completing, extending out the sidewalk, providing additional crosswalks, Buzzytown Park, and additional kiosks and planning for the high school area. So these will be all on the plans for your reference to use as you move along. The high school district, in most part, we agree with the Conway School, except I think their wording was poorly done in saying move the town center. We agree that that's an appropriate place for accommodating new growth. Would recommend a couple minor modifications. I think they may have gone a little overboard on expectations for the green roof accommodations. But some things that are worth considering are creating a street network, providing more parking for the health center and community center, providing some places for infill development and some open spaces, and then organize these buildings around a street network and update your zoning that would allow this kind of development to occur. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Randy to move, or Laz and Randy to talk more about the private sector investment. Thank you.
Good morning. When I think of Wilmington as a visitor, and I live in the northern part of the state, so please excuse my northern accent. One is the water. Great timing. It starts pouring on me. I found this old postcard in our room where we were staying, and to me, this is what Wilmington is about, the buildings. You have a great collection of buildings, historic buildings. They have wonderful details. You know, the church up the street, the bookstore, the Vermont house, they've got great details. They've got these wonderful canopies and their overhangs, or they're fairly colonial and they're set back against the building. Wonderful porch detail. Windows, I mean, the detail in the hood over the window, nicely done. Entrances, doors, great detail. Church steeple, town offices. And this is your public face. This is what people see when they come into town. This is who we are. The most important piece of all this, we need to maintain the buildings. And an owner of a building, this is their largest investment. And I've been in the architecture business for 30 years. And I've seen owners who cared more about their cars than they do their buildings. But it's very important. If you maintain your buildings, it's a lot less expensive than having to renovate your building. I'm going to just take you through a couple of slides of things that we have seen, impressions that have been made to us. You have this wonderful collection of buildings. Some of the buildings that need some help, take away from that. You know, your public face, it takes away from that. Another example, you know, you've got a great porch detail, and then you have another one that could use some help. Can you just speak a little louder? Sure, I'll try, yes. Again, there's little things like porch railings, entry doors, you know, the little, beautiful little, whoops, sorry. Jumping. Get it right. Beautiful little scroll work in the gable end that needs a paint job. Just little things, and really put a big, proud public face on your buildings. Now, Wilmington Water. That's why I wanted it to rain. Of course it doesn't. water, you know, people think water. What's water? You know, you can pour it, it doesn't hurt or anything. But water causes more damage to buildings than anything else. You know, there's the sun, there's snow. That stuff is pretty nasty. And that's how it can hold someone up. So you got to maintain the parts of your buildings. You have roofs, you have exterior walls, you have windows and doors, you have foundation, and you have site. Just walking around and seeing some stuff, you have wonderful slate roofs, but some of the roofs, the slate needs to be replaced. There are pieces missing. Where there are pieces missing, water gets in, causes damage, and then instead of just replacing a piece of slate or two, now you're replacing framing, or you're replacing. Same with the siding. You know, a little maintenance, a little painting, before it reaches a point where you have to replace stuff. Again, your public face, this is what the public sees. And a lot of historic buildings that I have found when we've worked on, over the years, the grade raises up, the building doesn't move, but grade over the years gets added up. So now you have wood in contact with ground. Ground gets wet, wood gets wet, it gets soaked up, starts rotting, and by the time you see it, you're not just fixing stuff, you're replacing it. So these are little things to keep an eye out for. And this is another example over here. You actually can see the framing. You know, the boards have rotted out, and here they've just started. Here are foundations. These are the things that hold up your building. And you know, there's holes here. The stone should be mortared. It's really maintenance and taking care of your building. And then there's all sorts of resources you can go to, like this one is off a website. It just talks about what you need to do to take care of your building. There's also a number of, the Vermont Division for Historic Preservation has a checklist that you can go through, and it helps you just keep an eye on what's going on so it doesn't reach a point where you're spending a lot of money to do renovation work. And then we're just showing you some people who have done work. 6 North Main Street, 3 North Main Street, and they're ongoing. 4 North Main Street, 5 West Main Street, 3 South Main Street, and now 9 South Main Street. But you just have a wonderful collection. They need a little tender loving care sometimes. And we're going to show, this is something that Heather did. We want to take a building and just give you an idea with some subtle changes how you can just improve the look of it. Something could be just color. Maybe you add a horizontal signboard like is typically seen on a lot of buildings. You may add an awning over an entrance. Maybe add another bay window to balance it out. And very simple stuff, not very expensive, but it just helps dress up things.
Right? This image before, this is kind of one of the primary gateways into the downtown area. And Tom talked about it from the perspective of the public realm improvements, streetscaping, you know, the crosswalks, additional planters, just like you have in the core of the downtown area to really highlight that, especially with the advent of the new pedestrian bridge right there. Ben, in just a second, we'll talk about the full wayfinding and branding campaign. But we also want to talk about the architecture right here really quickly and just talk about improvements to the private realm. And again, one of the things that just a splash of color on some of these buildings, we've talked about maintenance, we've talked about paint. And of course, anytime we talk about that, the first consideration, rightly so, is how do we pay for this? And so understand in the report and verbally, we'll talk about a variety of options. Obviously, one of the ideal ones is if we can get grant funding from afar to come in and pay for this. And we're exploring those options. Perhaps in lieu of that, you just receive a little bit of grant funding and you do a traditional facade program. That's also a terrific approach. And you may want to consider just doing a component facade grant approach. In other words, instead of an entire facade, perhaps for now you just do awnings or you just do signs, or in this case you just do paint. I think one of the great ways to pull this off, there was a Main Street community in Kentucky that did Let's Paint Downtown, and they all collaborated And instead of just one owner trying to paint their building, 20 property owners went in together. And you can imagine if you go to Sherwin-Williams or Benjamin Moore, if just one of you are asking for a discount, that may not happen. But if you're going to paint 20 or 30 buildings, all of a sudden they may consider a discount on that paint. And then those mutual owners would pick a Saturday, just like an Amish barn raising, and they would take turns painting each other's buildings. And that way the burden, not only was it very difficult, but it actually became a very fun and exciting opportunity. Ben's going to talk about a potential name for that process. Tripp also talked about some medium and some long-term strategies for how to fill your vacant buildings. There's also some things that you can do in the very immediate short term. You know, how can we at least mitigate the appearance of some of those vacant buildings? Some real simple, affordable strategies are, if possible, you know, put art, you know, behind those windows to display. Sometimes, like in this case, they simply took historic photographs, printed them on butcher paper, and taped them on the inside of a window. And all of a sudden, you're so drawn to the nostalgia of that view, you don't notice that the building is actually vacant. Occasionally, you run into a building where you can't get to the inside, but you can affix something on the outside. And in that case, like here in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, we simply took the kind of vinyl wraps that you put on cars, applied historic postcard scenery, and applied it to the exterior. Again, these are very temporary strategies. We don't want or even envision these to be long-term, but it certainly mitigates an inappropriate kind of vacant feel or look to the property. One of my favorite propositions for this, and you've got lots of great candidates in your town, is in the town of Conway, South Carolina, we simply did 11 by 17 posters, a size where we could print off of our own LaserJet printers. Featured, I am Conway. Imagine this campaign, which I am Wilmington. And you just had these photographs and simple statements from Sheila or Jerry or Gretchen about why I call Wilmington home. And the power of that is this big building was vacant, and you're so drawn to finding out her story or his story or their story, you don't even notice the fact that the building is vacant because you're so interested. And it just has the byproduct of building community pride about all these wonderful stories. Now we want to talk about design guidance real quick. In talking with Wendy, we found out that you have a Board of Architectural Review and you have a set of design guidelines. Currently, those guidelines are simply, text-based. They're really, frankly, just a part of the ordinance. It's not bad, it's not wrong. Matter of fact, probably most communities are that way. However, you're missing an opportunity to use that instrument to educate people about this wonderful architecture. You know, because like Laz just illustrated, you have all these wonderful different styles, different components, different periods of architecture. And wouldn't it be great if the document that helps make sure we maintain that standard of care and quality also taught people about all of these styles and architectural characters? So what I would encourage you to do is over time develop some illustrative and then can-do design guidelines. By illustrative, what I mean quite simply is this. Just use a bunch of photographs, okay? And especially have a whole bunch that have green check marks do this and have a few that have red X's that say don't do that. And the goal is, imagine the power of being able to say, I need to replace my slate shingle roof, or I need to do my siding. And imagine turning to a page and having 15, 20 examples of good solutions that you can pick from. That's what I mean by a can-do approach to design guidelines, as opposed to thou shalt not, thou shalt not. You know, flip the scales on these things and train people, teach people about the architecture that they possess. Another strategy that would be in combination with that is this is what we call sort of a pattern book approach to that. And Laz really almost sort of gave you the guts of an architectural pattern book, where you just go through and you pick some of your dominant styles and you call out all those elements, whether it's windows and doors or porches. And again, now all of a sudden people understand what makes their architecture special and how to continue to maintain and enhance their buildings. One thing that we heard is let's really not just educate about architecture, what makes this community special, this distinctive architecture, but let's make sure that message gets passed on in perpetuity. We also understood that your high school is relocating out of town. Several years ago, Ben and I were working in this town called Greensboro, Kentucky, in central Kentucky, back when we were young, skinny, and didn't have gray hair. And we were awaiting our downtown tour, and it kept getting darker and kept getting darker, and we're like, guys, should we start the tour? He says, well, wait just a second. The other thing we heard from Wendy and the design committee is y'all have created, or in the process of creating, a historic walking guide brochure so that people could walk around and understand the buildings and what they're looking at and the significant history of your place. And so all of a sudden, all these high school students showed up, about 12 to 15 of them. And those students took the text that Main Street community had developed, and the students were the docents, okay? They memorized the text for each building or each site or each historic event. And I'm going to be honest with you, some of the presentations, you as an adult probably would have done a better job because they, like my kids, said a whole lot of likes and ums and all, but you know what? I really didn't care because to me, the power in what they pulled off was twofold. Number one, they have guaranteed that the next generation of citizens understand the stories that make their place special. And secondly, you're so drawn into the tour and the guides, you learn something without knowing it, okay? And so I think that's part of the power in using this strategy to reconnect the high school that won't physically be in your town. Let's at least bring the students back into town. And this is those guys. Last but not least, some other things that can be done, especially for the Main Street Design Committee. How can we reacquaint people with all of this awesomeness? One of the things that I hope you've seen today, and I hope you've enjoyed, is I hope you've enjoyed seeing your community through our eyes and through our cameras, because you have a beautiful place, and sometimes when you live in it, you miss it, okay? You get so used to it. So there was this one town where we commissioned anybody who wanted to participate to do a photo contest, and you could photograph an architectural detail in downtown. All right, we took those photographs and created a temporary art gallery in a vacant building. Okay, now we're reusing one of your vacant buildings. People got to see all those photographs, got to see the opportunity of that building. We awarded a prize for the grand prize. Then we took those same photographs and we had an architectural scavenger hunt. The first person to find all of those photographs, by the way, people didn't believe that much beauty exists in their town. We said, it really does. And so they searched, and when the person found the most, they won a secondary prize. And then you can take those same photographs and create posters, or a really, really wonderful one is just converted into a coloring book for the kids. So again, you're always trying to train the next generation of citizens about the things that make this place special. Finally, and I think Stacy's going to talk about this perhaps a little bit later, another thing that you ought to consider is interactive workshops. We've heard a lot of commentary about the vacant storefronts, but Stacy made an observation, even the ones that are occupied, in some instances could be improved. The visual merchandising in the storefront displays. We would really strongly encourage the Main Street community to host consultants with the Vermont Downtown Program to come in to talk about visual merchandising, to have a consultant that would walk around and give free consults about how they might improve their displays and things of that nature. And all of these things combined are just raising the bar and raising awareness of the beautiful architectural assets that you possess.
All right, I'm going to try to make it fast. I know we've already been an hour. We said it was going to be an hour. All these people take their time and dilly-dally and drone on about boring stuff. And now we're actually to the interesting stuff, right? We've heard some fantastic stuff from the other parts of the team where we've talked about the character of the community. We've talked about the assets that you have and the assets that you want to preserve. And one of the biggest things that we want to do, and one of the biggest things that really impacted me was some of those details about your customers. People literally are inherently drawn to stop and explore. I walked around all during this process, and constantly I saw people randomly walking around, stopping the car, getting out, and walking to explore. Now, in every single incident that we saw it, they'd get to a certain spot, they'd realize there wasn't more to see, and then they'd turn around. And one of our primary goals is increase that overall density and increase the opportunity for more experiences for both locals and for those visitors. Now, when I say density, it doesn't mean 6-story apartments. It simply means that we don't have as many vacancies and we have a more well-rounded experience for both the people that live here and the people that visit. We want to make some recommendations on some ways that you can tell your story and do it in a consistent way. And I always like to start with color. And one of the first things I had to do, I had to go back and I actually had to check the manual. And the manual says that it is okay when you're a community that has trees and waters, it is okay to use colors other than blue and green. So we got some approval from the manual. The manual says it's okay. So what we wanted to do was we actually wanted to pull some of the colors out of the space itself, the buildings that make up the community, because we know the blues and greens are going to be the constants that are introduced through our photography. And we don't necessarily need our graphic identity to carry the full burden of our story. If the only thing that someone sees is our logo, we have done a poor job communicating. So we want to create an identity that comes to represent this place instead of draw a picture that tells every story you've ever had. So that's what we really want to do with the system. And I do always have to give a disclaimer. The colors on the screen are not as they appear. But what I did was I went through and I sampled several photos, and these look very muted, but we got this really great, rich kind of burgundy color, and then a couple of shades of greens, and then a rich, it's almost like it's a gold and brown. It's this really nice complement, but they come together to be fantastic colors that couple with the photography that we took, and you'll see that as we go. But through that, we also wanted to go through, we wanted to look at the typeface. We made a couple typeface selections, and the typeface selections came directly from typefaces that were created at the same time the community was. We wanted to be able to have that justification. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a relatively subjective selection. We wanted to have some sort of strategy behind that connection. So we picked a very clean and classic typeface that we felt like would really hammer it home. But one of the big things we wanted to do was we wanted to be able to tie together the concepts with messaging. And what we do with that is we create what we call a brand statement. And do you want to read it? Okay. I'm going to see if I can read that for you. We are a distinctive place nestled in Deerfield Valley. We are a southern Vermont village with a welcome that is warm and an environment that is as relaxing as it is beautiful. Since before the creation of this nation, Wilmington has been a gathering place in a serene valley, a center for commerce, a traditional community, and a spirit tightly bound. In the valley, our mountains and streams are evident. They captivate our guests, calling them to enjoy this place we call home in every season. Whether it is canoeing our reservoir in the summer, skiing our slopes in the winter, or taking in the amazing color of our surroundings each fall, Wilmington is a perfect center for your ideal Vermont experience. In the valley, our story is built on hard work. The branches of the Deerfield River converge here. The very water on which we settled powered the mills that built our homes and the striking buildings of our downtown. Today, we remain a people that know the value of a hard day's work, who are always willing to lend a helpful hand. We also recognize the splendor of this place we call home and welcome others to experience this very special place. In the valley, it's not done yet. Gets better. In the valley, our future is as rich as our history. Here, in the shadow of Old Haystack, we are cultivating a vision that will preserve the character of our home and assure that our grandchildren will love the same things about Wilmington that we do. A stroll through the heart of town, a friendly smile from a neighbor, a gathering to hear music in a place designed by the same man who created Boston Symphony Hall. Explore our valley, take a walk down our streets, visit our shops, dine in our restaurants, stay in one of our inns, and experience the place we love. We welcome you to be our guest, and we invite you to discover the best of our Wilmington in the Valley. So, one of the things, there are a couple key strategies that document does. Now, granted, it's long. It's not intended to be the ad copy that you run in every piece that you have, but it ties together so many of the things that you said were important to you. Now, something else that it does with this very simple positioning statement of in the valley, it connects you to a greater region and a collection of assets that are the draw that are bringing those affluent zip codes from all over the country. It makes you a part of the puzzle. It makes you a piece of the whole. And it does it in a way that is your own vernacular. You called it the valley. We live in the valley. And so it positions you to be part of a greater regional effort. Now, I think the inspiration is relatively simple for the design aesthetic. We tie directly into some of that sign design. We give you a simple way to create an icon that ties to your identity. And then we're able to use it in black and white. We're able to use it in one color. The simplicity makes it easy to implement. Now, once we create that base foundation with our typeface, we can also have it tie over into our organizational identity. And the thing is, you all went through, and Wilmington Works did a logo competition, and they created a logo for the organization. And the thing is, that logo doesn't have anything to do with this. This is the destination identity. This is the thing that we want our businesses to take and help promote. We want our organizations to incorporate. This is the thing that will earn our brand equity of this place. But we can easily take those same word type, the same typeface, and integrate in different graphics to begin to expand this brand system. And the thing that I'm here to tell you is this, like I said, is an organizational logo. Its job is to quickly tell people who's in charge of something, who they might donate money to, who they might volunteer to help. It is an attributor to the organizer, but it's not the identity of the place. So there's not necessarily any good reason to change this just because we're introducing a destination identity. We simply showed a slight modification to the typeface so that they're all in the same family. Now, in addition to that, we didn't have a whole lot of time to go into what we call brand extension. But what I always like to do is I like to show how the same baseline of colors and typeface selection will bring us into our events as well and tying those in. And Randy made the recommendation about the event wrapped around paint. Now, I'm one where, to me, the best way to get somebody to come out and do hard work is to give them a beer. So let's call it gallons and pints. Let's turn it into a regular event where we get somebody out there playing music while they're up on a scaffolding painting the building, and then at the end we can all have a cold beer together. You know, make it fun. Turn it into a social activity. That is the key to success. If you constantly lean on only the social capital and the desire to give back to your community, as noble as that is, that only goes so far. But if you can convert a public service into a social event, then it then gives back to the person who's volunteering. So making sure you create those events in a way where they really become an aspect that they look forward to. Now, in addition to that, we wanted to look at signage. We want to make sure that the signage is consistent and presents into your community a way that every single thing that we need to tell can be told in the same way. It's not good enough just to sit there and realize, oh, well, we need to tell somebody where the parking lot is, so we're going to tell them this way with this color and this typeface, and then all of a sudden, hey, we need to tell them where this is, and we do it a different way with a different color and a different typeface. A consistent identity system gives us that opportunity to always know how to handle any situation. And just very quickly, one of the things that I wanted to point out, this Welcome to Historic Wilmington in the Valley, these are pole-mounted district gateway signs. These do not have to be the things that announce arrival at your corporate limits. It can be the things that announce arrival into the core of your community. Those pivot points where the place starts to feel different. And we know out here, it's right here at the pedestrian bridge. Like that is the area where everything tightens in. And I think you all instinctually know where those areas are. But you can put these pole-mounted entry signs into that area where everything changes, the feeling changes. But then again, we've got some destination trailblazer signs. And then even some of these simple amenity-based signs using international standard for tourism icons. All this stuff can fit into the same system. But one of the things that we're doing is we're trying to make it simple and reproducible. A black background, that black background can replicate the public amenities, and it makes it the easiest to assure consistency as you phase a signage strategy. But then because of that, we also want to be able to give you the opportunity to infuse some of that unique personality into the space itself. Now, banners, oftentimes one of the problems with banners is we design them against a white computer screen instead of thinking about what they're going to look like in the community they go into. So we way over design them. They end up being way too busy. We want the banners to introduce a sense of continuity and calm in your community. So being able to use a nice, simple, clean design with solid color backs that give you a sense of continuity. And I'm showing 4 different colors, and guess what? You have 4 different main streets. So it might be that what you actually do is each corridor, each node gets its own color designation. Play around with it a little, because you can't tell somebody that something's on Main Street. It's not good enough. So you got to have a little bit extra help there. But then also just knowing all this stuff needs to move over into ways that your own citizens can show their pride, whether it's getting a hat, whether it's getting some nice clothes to wear. We heard so much about the walking tour, historic walking tour, really, really excited about it. We want to make sure that when you get to that cover of that piece reinforces this identity, reinforces that personality. And then Laz talked about that handbook, helping to tie everything in together, making sure that all of those amenities that you have are reinforcing that same identity. And it simply says, maintaining the parts, a guide to preservation and maintenance. But taking something that generally we might think, oh, we'll just photocopy it and staple it in the corner and that'll be good enough. No, this is your character of place. You set the tone for how important it is with how you deliver that information to the people that you're trying to get to do something and invest their own resources. But then finally, I want to just show you a couple images real quick in terms of marketing. We wanted your image to be unbelievably confident. There's some things that are going on right now, right in your backyard, that are tremendous investments in heightening the awareness of this region on a national scene. And you deserve to be right along for that ride. You deserve to be able to have a confident statement that will attract people to Wilmington, that will preserve the values that you care for. Whether they're coming simply to stop by and have dinner, or whether they're thinking about investing in a new business, buying a building, or making this place their home. So what we have here is we have a very, very subtle message. We have the opportunity now to change out, whether it's hospitality in the valley, relaxation in the valley. The thing that's interesting about this is because of the subtlety of the headline and the design, it draws the people in to try to find what the next message will be. Bringing in these different shapes that kind of pay tribute to the personality, but also being able to still highlight the imagery of the community. Now, all of these pictures that you see were taken pretty much on Wednesday, because as you know, it's been pouring down since then. But it also gives you the opportunity for local businesses to tie in as well. There's plenty of space here for them to incorporate their own logo, their own identity. And when your business community realizes the value in investing in the overall heightened awareness of your community, you've begun to hit on gold. Because when the public and private sector can tackle the issue together, that is when you achieve true success. But you can just see this message gets amplified with each and every image, each and every message. It just keeps tying in together. Pristine, authentic, illumination in the valley, delicious, run deep. You have so much variation that it becomes very, very easy to implement. So with that, I get to pass it back on to Tripp, and we're in the home stretch.
Thank you, Ben. Since I'm the, yes, sir.
May I just make a quick comment?
Yes, sir.
About that last presentation?
Yes.
In the valley, Wilmington in the valley. I don't know if this is written in stone, but I just said this to Susie. That sounds very, very generic, whereas Deerfield or Wilmington, the Deerfield River Valley has a uniqueness to it.
Right.
That's my personal opinion.
We're dealing with a situation that has some moving parts to it, and there's some deliberate moves that we're doing there. So your point is extremely well taken. I'm always impressed with what the team can do in just a couple of days, but I know as you went through this presentation, you probably were continuing to think, okay, where does the funding come from? How do we organize for this? What are the next sort of things? There are a few things that we really want to try and have you explore, and you're already beginning to explore them. The first one is the whole notion of community-supported enterprise. We've seen this, probably Vermont's at the leading edge of this. When I do work in other states, I refer to Vermont, local crowdsourcing for small business. We've seen it happen in Hardwick and Virgin and Middlebury and Morrisville, where communities have come together for specific businesses actually to support them, whether it's startup capital, whether it's some bridge financing, stabilization, or so forth. The other thing related to it is just donation of time or talents. One of the unique things about being in a community where you have visitors come in with expertise from other places is they can lend that kind of expertise. They love this place. The investment that they made in the Wilmington Fund wouldn't have been here if there wasn't a love for this place. We also want to think about the whole notion of taking community-supported enterprise and looking at community-supported real estate. And we know the community is beginning to explore some degree of investment fund on working on either working with buildings, purchasing buildings, renovating buildings, or helping property owners do those kind of things. We have worked in communities that have established local real estate funds, and we really are eager to connect you with a community in the Deep South that did this very thing, a community of less than 1,000 people who decided amongst about 10 or 12 of them that said, I'm really tired of putting my money into or putting all of my money into a 401k. I want to put a little bit of my money into my own community. They have bought and renovated, how many now, Stacy, buildings? 8, 10? 12. Thank you. 12 buildings in their downtown, renovated those buildings, and are leasing those buildings to tenants that they knew fit the market for what they wanted to do. And we're talking about an impoverished, rural, isolated community in Mississippi. Trust me, if this town can pull it off, you can pull it off because you don't have all those other preludes to you. The other thing that we can look at too is crowdsourced commercial real estate fund. An alternate strategy, I think it's more complex, but we're seeing some of this happen. It's happening in Washington. We're seeing some of this happen in California. It could be something that you look at as well. I think there's several different models that you're looking at. Stephanie has already begun to work on exploring some of the funding pieces. Our team will be back in October. The Vermont Community Foundation, their whole purpose, is to focus on sustainability and building a stronger state here. We know the Orton Family Foundation has been very good to communities in New England. There's a downtown transportation fund. I believe Laz and St. Albans, you took advantage of that for some of your initial streetscape work in the core of downtown. And we know that Gretchen's already beginning to explore that for here. And then there's also Enterprise Community Loan Fund and NeighborWorks, which Stephanie feels like are really good matches. What we don't want to do is just give you a laundry list, which is what this is. In our report, we'll be delving into how to approach these groups, the kind of messaging that you need to have. And we hope that the other slides that we presented, the recommendations we presented, can be part of your application in order to say, look, we've got our act together. We know what we're doing. We've got all this here. And here we are needing this assistance to sort of build partnerships with some of these other groups. From an organizational standpoint, again, we can't reiterate enough. We heard in the public meeting the other night, well, what about the money? Where's the money coming from? When we first learned about the Wilmington Fund here, it about knocked us over. There are communities your size that would clamor, scream, beg, and roll over and do whatever they could to have a group of folks who came together to donate money to do good things in their community. The fact that you have the Wilmington Fund here, the visionaries behind that deserve the compliments of this community, because their love for this community is evidenced in their giving to this fund. And we very rarely encounter that kind of initiative in communities. Certainly, there are a lot of additional funding models that we look at as well, whether it's a public model, a private model, an earned model, and Stephanie can get into those details if you have questions on that. Part of really what we would need to see is, the idea of a dedicated manager who's here, wakes up every day, whose job it is, thinks about how to do that. You have an incredible volunteer in Gretchen as she does this ongoing work. How do you get that moving on ahead? And I'll tell you, the volunteers on your committees are incredible as well. It is very rare for us to experience a group that's come in as prepared as Wilmington has been prepared for us. And we're on Community 4 now. And every single community that's preceded you is a lot more sophisticated as far as, I put quotes around sophisticated, as far as population and the amount of people and access to capital. Looking at prioritizing, part of what we'll show you in a moment on that is doing a strategy board that looks at this. The fact that you passed this 1% local option, I don't know all the background, I don't know all the debate. I'm from away, but I will tell you this, going back to that market data, we were joking around about ourselves that that's actually the Robin Hood tax. Because when we look at a market where you're doing about 11% local spending here, and you've got an additional penny that you're putting on 90% of the customer base, yeah, why not get a penny or two from them so that you can continue to cultivate the place they love. And as you look at that local option, it presents for you some tremendous things that you could be doing, whether you're looking at that additional revenue to help fund the ongoing operation of Wilmington Works while you're continuing to put some of that into the general fund for ongoing operations. We worked in a community that actually took 1/12 of their local operation. 1 out of every 12, dollars was going to their local group to do this. But what that local group in economic development was doing was raising the money so that that local option was continuing to grow. And so as that revenue continued to grow, that 12% continued to grow, and the organization could build capacity and go on from there. There are a lot of different ways to look at that. We'll be back for October, early October, to work with Wilmington Works on a work planning session. And then in December and March, we'll be here, I think it's December or March, we'll be working on the implementation strategy piece of this. Part of what we're looking at too is facade grants. There's 8 ways to Sunday. Randy can talk about it, Laz can talk about it, Stacy can talk about it, on how to deal with working on these facades. One of the key things is whether it's Tom's recommendations in the public realm, or Laz's recommendations on the buildings, or Ben's recommendations on the marketing, all of this boils down to the economic vitality of the community. We're not just doing these things and making these recommendations because it sounds good and it feels good and it's warm and fuzzy. all this is helping to enhance the economic viability of the community. And so there are a lot of different ways to look at it. The youth corps, angel investors, the paint and pint, you name it. Again, looking at some of the early projects, and Stacy can go through these when she's back for her work session, but the Facade grant program, some of the window enhancement that we touched on, the visual and merchandising, business recruitment, the whole idea of pop-ups and getting the word out. I had a group I worked with in a small town. They had a group of active retirees that went out every Friday and they went shopping in various communities. Well, what they were doing was they were carrying a package of investment material with available buildings, and they were leaving them with merchants that they thought had expansion opportunities that would be viable in their town based on that experience. Got their first restaurant after 2 months of doing that exercise. Came in, their first new restaurant in years. So just some of those pieces. And part of what we'll be looking at is the marketing rollout, even things like the shop independent movement, which are critically important. All of this will be put together in what we call a strategy board. And the strategy board, what it does is it takes the 5 themes that we've gone through this afternoon. It'll have first steps, what do we do this year? What are some next steps after that? What are some things that may be ongoing or long-term? And then some funding options as well as some goal statements on the end. That'll be part of what we put together as we move on through this process. And trust that we're already thinking very deeply about that, and we'll be back to go over that with Wilmington Works as we move ahead. I want to wrap up and say you all have been more than welcoming to us while we've been here. If we continue to stay, Ben will eventually be able to sit in that chair and fit him perfectly. Thank you for taking care of us the past few days. The warmth that you have shown us here in Wilmington has been remarkable, and we're very grateful for the organization that you had in pulling all this off for us. And with that, I'll wrap it up and certainly open it for your questions for any member of our team. So, thank you very much.
Every DOT is a little different. One of the overall goals of any wayfinding system is to reduce the number of signs, not increase it. I will say, there are going to be DOT standard signs that we really can't do much with. I have seen some DOTs that have allowed us to actually take like a black figure back and back the sign with it. So it could then almost look like that green standard sign now had a frame that fit into our community. But the thing that I will say, and the thing that I always tell you is, don't get too upset about the things that are visual standards. Green highway signs are going to be green highway signs in every single community, and every community's got them. So don't beat your head up too much about some of that stuff, but if you can, your overall goal should be to reduce sign clutter, consolidate messages anywhere that you can, and make each and every sign look as attractive as it can. But just know the standards are the standards.
My second question is a little bit broader. That is some thinking and some strategies about how a community or municipal or developmental energy that's being derived here, and an interrelationship of that property owners to do a lot of, particularly struck me, had all the photos of some damage on the building as well. What are some strategies about how you get a private property owner to come into this thing?
To be motivated, to be energized. I'm going to defer it to some of my teammates. Randy, do you want to address some of that?
Well, one of the big